And I'm following this car and it kept going faster and faster. And I was nervous because we were kind of sliding on these dirt roads on the curves and they started going a little faster. So I sped up and the right hand wheels of the truck, both front and back, slid off the road. And there was a very steep drop off there. And my thought was, oh my God, I just killed all of us. That's it. We're all dead. And that second, the whole cab like lit up with this golden light and the truck lifted up and we rocketed to the left and up this drive that I didn't even see there. And it went up really fast and we came to a stop against a rock and it cracked the bug shield on my dad's truck.
Welcome to Soul Explorers with your hosts, Gary Langley and Sally Taylor. Welcome to Soul Explorers with your host, Sally Taylor. My name is Gary Langley, and today we have Ivory LaNoue, an angel communicator with us. Ivory, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here today.
We're so pleased that you're here. Could you start us off with just a little short story of how you came to this work? Not everybody in the world is an angel communicator. So how did this come to you?
I never thought I was going to be an angel communicator. I never thought I was going to work professionally with any of my spiritual gifts. I tried not to for a long time. So I've seen angels since I was very tiny. I remember my first experience was around 18 months, 2 years old, that I recall very vividly. And then it just continued from there. And I just thought everybody saw angels and spirit. And I thought they heard these things, but I found out before first grade that that was not true. So I really tried to squash all of this for a long time, but it wasn't working. And the angels just kept coming and talking to me, which I always loved that. But what happened was I was in a relationship that was it was a very toxic person who just like was shielded from me. I wasn't able to see that for a while in it. And then all of a sudden, like, boom, my angels are like, look who you're with. And they were telling me, you need to move to Sedona. You need to start a spiritual business. You need to write a book. You need to host a show. I'm like, I'm just trying to hang on day by day here, trying to survive. But I said, I will do all of this. So it wasn't very long before I moved up to Sedona. And I had already studied with Suzanne for mediumship and Suzanne Wilson. And so once I got there and immediately I started hosting a show. And I've had it on a few different platforms before the current one. And I started writing a book. And then they're like, now you need to do this type of session. And they told me what to put in it. And now you need to do this type of session. And before I knew it, almost everything I'm doing and almost every client I'm seeing is angelic work. So it's not like I aimed to be an angel communicator, but more like my angels decided I'm going to be an angel communicator. And they just kept telling me what they want me to do until I did it, which is, how it works. But I'm so glad they did. I didn't want to leave the field of mental health. It was sort of kicking and screaming, but I still get to do my counseling. So to me, I've loved every career I've had 3, and this is my favorite by far.
And it is helping people. So you're still doing the same work. It's just a different form. So did you feel that your studying under Suzanne Wilson increased your ability to communicate with the angels?
No, because that was already so strong. Suzanne's one of the ones who kind of put a little thought in my head about doing something professionally with it. And already my angels at that same time were doing you need to write a book, you need to host a show. So it's like I was getting that from outside of the angels, which is a lot how angel signs work. You hear a message, you might hear it from your angels, then you start hearing it from people outside of you. You might read it. It starts coming from all different sources, and it just got the wheels turning faster that I needed to move in that direction.
So I have a question. Sally and I both have been inundated with the numbers 1111.
Hmm.
It's almost, I mean, it gets ridiculous. We see it so much that we take a photograph of it or a screenshot and send it to each other and it started around the time we began the podcast. So I understand that's an angel number. Could you comment on that at all?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on angel numbers. I actually refer people to a website that a woman put together that my angels love. However, 1111 is one I'm super familiar with, of course. And 1111 is the most common angel number for people to see. And it's usually either that you are in the midst of a spiritual awakening. Oh, for some reason, angels are coming in really powerfully as I'm telling you this. I'm covered in chills. And the other reason would be to say that keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. You know, you're about to have a epiphany moment. You're about to have a major shift forward on the journey you're already on spiritually. So that's great to have after your show starts.
That's the message I got. Keep doing what you're doing. So I actually heard that. So how do angels appear to you? I mean, I know how I see them,
Well, I'm
which
going to tell you how I saw them until I was a young teen was winged beings. And they were traditional, like you see in biblical paintings and statues, and they had wings and robes, and their faces are so beautiful and long flowing hair. But then all of a sudden, around 12, 13, I felt their energy coming in and I could hear them, but I was seeing these lights that were just gorgeous. And I didn't understand what's going on. I feel them again. They're really into this show today. Lots of angelic energy. They started telling me that this is what we look like in the celestial realm. We are beings of light. And they let me know it's just easier for them to come through as their true form, the beings of light, than it is to assume our expected form, which is the winged beings. Now, I have seen them a couple times like that since then, but almost always it's forms of light. And I'll just show you for people who, I don't know if people are watching or listening or both. So it's about the size of a football, but the ends are not kind of pointy like a football. So it's more like an oval, about the general size of a football. And the light within it is got movement and depth. And as soon as that light comes in, I feel the energy of the angels, which gives me chills. I just get chills. And that's just the much higher frequency angels have than we do.
oh,
And it's impossible not to watch it. It's mesmerizing. It's gorgeous. And the light gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I can only speak of what happens for me because I can't speak of other people's experiences, but that's the way I see them most often. But they also take other light forms.
yeah, my impression, I don't actually see them visually, but my impression is they're very tall light beings, like 7, 8 feet tall. That's how I perceive them. And it's sort of just more of an inner feeling that that's what they look like.
Well, they are so big. I mean, if you want to talk about like our energy field, like I know my energy field is large. It's like a 5 foot around my body. But an angel's energy, which is what they are, what we are, what everything is, an angel's energy is huge. And it's interesting you say that, Gary, because when I see archangels, that's different. Like they usually come in and the light is more vaguely humanoid shape, but
Mhm.
it's super tall, sometimes like 15 feet tall or taller. And so angels do have very large energy, and that's probably why you're feeling it that way.
Interesting.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
How do you understand, Ivory, sort of their general nature and what their role is in our incarnation? How are they here to assist us? Why did they take on this particular job?
The only reason, like, they don't really talk about that to me, and I haven't really spent time asking them why they take on the role, but I do know that they're with us lifetime after lifetime, particularly our primary angels, the ones who are with us from birth to death. Not all of our angels and guides are, most of them are not. But the primary ones know us so well, and they have a very close, loving bond with us. They care about our soul development. And so they've got this attachment. We have a relationship with them when we're on the other side between lifetimes, before we're incarnated. And so they have that ongoing investment in our well-being and in the growth of our soul, which is what it's all about. When people say, I just try to figure out, what is this all about? It's about growing your soul. And so they're sort of our guides to help us grow our soul the best way possible in each lifetime.
Obviously, they can come to us in many forms.
Mhm.
Is beyond just sort of our expectation. Is there a reason they might choose to come in those different ways? Is it to keep us from being afraid of the situation? Or, why might they choose to show up for some as a human form with wings, whereas another person, they might show up as a being of light,
Well,
that
they
sort of
told
thing?
me the reason they came to me as winged beings is because I grew up Catholic. And I went to a Catholic church with like a Latin mass, and there was more bigger than life-size statues of angels. And I went to catechism. And so I knew what angels were. And I already, so they came to me as that from a young age. But then I don't know what happened at 12 or 13 where they just figured I was mature enough, old enough to understand that they weren't going to expend the extra energy to pretend to be a form, I guess, like to fill an expectation rather than just be light form. But sometimes they come to us because they might show themselves to you because you're in a moment where you're very down. Maybe you're going through a dark night of the soul. You could be very depressed or grieving. They'll come through at a time like that and show themselves for inspiration and hope. But sometimes, like the other forms that I see them in, the easier forms for them to take, which are also light forms, they'll do that to get your attention. Sometimes it's to emphasize something you're thinking about. Sometimes, I know for me, sometimes it's to get me to stop doing something because I don't watch TV. I listen to it and I'm usually working on something. And I'll be watching something like Little House on the Prairie. Yes, I love Little House on the Prairie. And then all of a sudden, I'll see these little twinkly lights and I'm like, oh, hello. And then I look at the screen. I'm like, that is not Little House on the Prairie. So, I have to turn the TV off or turn the channel because, they don't want me to absorb things that are negative energy. Neither do I. It's too hard. I can't really do my work if I do. But there's many reasons. Sometimes they come to you just because they know you want to hear them. They know you want to see a sign. So many people are working hard, putting in a lot of effort and energy to connect with their angels, and they want to give them some sign that you're making progress. Even sometimes they don't think they are, but they need a little sign from their angels that indeed they are making progress.
Now, I've felt, and I had always thought this was a guide, but I was told in a reading, no, that those are angelics, where I have clairaudiently heard them and they have saved me from.
Yes.
And I'll tell you a real quick story. In the early 70s, I lived in Florida and we had a real cold snap. And I had a big quilt on my bed, which was at that time a mattress on the floor. And I had a space heater in the room because the house didn't even have heating. So I kept moving the space heater closer and closer. And suddenly it's like somebody's face was right in front of mine and they yelled, Gary. And I opened my eyes, and as I did, the quilt blew up in flames. Yeah, so and then they saved me on the roadway one time as well. But I definitely hear them. They use my name, and I don't think of myself by my name. So I know it's not me when I hear, Gary, you may want to slow down. There's a car in your lane coming around that blind curve,
Oh, yeah.
which actually happened. And in fact, they said a gray Pinto. How many
Wow.
Pintos do you see? A primered gray Pinto came around that blind curve in my lane, but they didn't tell me what to do, but they said, you might want to slow down. There's a gray Pinto in your lane. So they gave me evidence. They used my name, so I knew it was not my own thoughts.
I've had so many experiences like that. And when you were talking about that, the slow down, You're going to know I live in the rural part of Arizona when I tell you this story. I was in Payson singing rehearsal with some friends of mine for a show. And I was coming back late at night, and that road is like no traffic on the road, and it's pitch black dark and heavy woods on either side up on the top ridge of a mountain. And I'm driving the speed limit, and I heard my angel say, stop. And I did. I stopped and I started to go around the curve. As I stopped, there's a giant, huge male elk standing in my lane. Now, if you hit an animal that size going 50 miles, 55 miles an hour, you're going to have some trouble. And there's no cell phone signal there, no traffic. And it would have hurt the animal. I just sat there and just sort of going, thank you, thank you, thank you. And they've done things like that so many times. Like you said, I will hear them say, get out of this lane. And immediately somebody comes really fast, like having an accident, like through that lane and just in front of my car, I would have been sideswiped and part of the accident. So many times, things like that.
Yeah.
Gary, did you hear them say that out loud when your blanket caught on fire?
It was like somebody was 2 inches from my face and yelled my name.
That's how I hear my angels when they are urgent. Like I'll hear them yelling, and for me, I hear it with my ears, but most of the time I hear it in my head, and that's how almost everyone hears their angels, is in your head, and that's what gets in the way for people hearing their angels' messages, because they start second guessing it, and oh, I'm making this up. Oh, I think I'm hearing something. That's just my thoughts. And so they're actually getting in the way of their own ability to hear their angels speak.
Yeah. And they brought me out of a dead sleep. I mean, it was like somebody was leaning over me, yelling my name in my face. And it was instantaneous. I opened my eyes. The moment I did, the quilt went whoosh into
It
flames.
was not your time, Gary.
No,
And weren't even meant to be burned.
no.
I hope you
No.
weren't.
They can do such amazing things to save us, and they've saved my life numerous times. Sometimes like these miraculous things that I'll tell you about that later later in the show.
No, that's okay. But I think that so many people have these experiences, and some of them will acknowledge that it was a protective source that came from it. And other people think, oh, wow, wasn't that a coincidence? Because, I've had almost identical experiences as well. One where I was driving away on my way home from visiting family, and my infant daughter was in the back, and I heard suddenly a question, but it was loud. What would happen to you if you were in an accident in this car without your seatbelt on? And then I looked down and I'm like, I don't have my seatbelt. So I put it on. But I wasn't, I at the time I didn't think that it was, but it was loud. Like it was almost audible. It was like, it's hard to call a thought loud, but it was a loud thought. And of course, 30 miles down the road, I got run off the road by another guy who moved into my lane and
I
rolled
feel
down the embankment.
I feel angels coming in again, just
Yeah,
seconding that was them.
absolutely. We've all, I think, most human beings will have had some incident in their life, and whether they acknowledge it or not, it is really wonderful signs that we are aided and assisted on this journey.
I agree. And it's very easy to discount it when you're hearing it in your head, but there's two things I always think of. Number one, oh, I just saw an angel, just like in front of my screen right now. So I don't know why they're popping in right now, but they're probably just glad we're spreading this word. One thing is that if you weren't thinking of that topic when you heard that message in your head, then it's not your thought. And if it's not something you would ordinarily think or say, it's not your thought. And so that's a good way to start identifying those messages you hear in your head as defining whether it's yours or theirs. Oh, and something else you said, Sally, I think is really important. You said like whoever that came from. So I'll have people ask me, well, how do I tell the difference between whether it's an angel or my soul, my higher self, or some other higher power? And I'm like, if that's getting in your way, let go of it. Who cares? If it's positive and it's helping you or saving you, turning your life to a more positive direction, let it go for now of where it's coming from. It's obviously a higher source. It's obviously something that wants the best and highest good for you. And worry about exactly who it is later. But the fact that you can start identifying you're getting these messages from a higher source is very important.
You know, something I've noticed through people that communicate with angels is that I call it angel speak. They speak in very cryptic ways. Do you find that to be the case?
That I do or angels do.
That angels speak in very cryptic
Um,
ways.
Not I don't know if it's I don't know, sometimes, I mean, it
Yeah,
has been sometimes, but I think it's more succinct. There's not a waste of words generally. They're not gonna sit and give you a soliloquy.
yeah.
They're going to come in and they're gonna say, "Stop doing that," or "That I've heard that person's not for you," or even just short, "Not for you." You
Mhm.
know, I mean, it's very, very to the point and not usually long and flowy.
So I have another question for you because we're talking about personal experiences here. So I'll go ahead and bring up one other that for me was an angelic experience, but it wasn't while I was conscious, like we're speaking right now. It was a lucid dream state where, and this was fairly early in my spiritual shifting and my in a grief journey that I was on. And I became lucid during the middle of a dream and realized that I had this very tall, glowing in a white robe figure in front of me who had this rainbow sort of aura emanating out from their body, and rather androgynous looking individual. And I had a knowing that I was being taught, but becoming lucid in the presence of this individual was so emotionally overwhelming that it popped me out and I was awake and wide awake, in my bed and in my room. How would you interpret that experience?
Well, it honestly feels like a being, a very high level being to me, not so much an angel, but
Okay.
could be like a member of a council. There's all these councils. I've had them come to me and I don't know who they are and I don't know why they're choosing me, but it's not like they come regularly. They come now and then, different ones. So there's councils out there and there's beings out there that are not necessarily angels, but they are just as high or higher frequency, even with the same intentions for good for you. So
Okay.
it feels like it's one of those beings. And, without feeling it myself, it's very hard to know. But I love that it had the rainbow energy, the rainbow aura, like every color you could possibly have in your aura. That's really beautiful. Sounds like they're very balanced individual.
Yeah.
Oh, the angel
Well,
said yes.
okay. Well, very good. And so, is there any need or reason to differentiate then between what we would consider angelic beings? Do you really categorize them specifically in a different way than, say, some other high level teacher or counselor or guide? How do you
I do. I
differentiate that?
do. I differentiate them, but I consider it like a study. Like my life has been like a study of this, and I'm very curious about other beings and um, anything that wants to communicate with me that's of the light. I am extremely open to that, and I want that, and I enjoy it and I journal it. But you don't need to worry about it. I'm saying like in the early stages where somebody's first trying to develop angelic communications, the important thing is just realizing you're getting a message and you can feel that it's good and it's obviously something that's helpful and loving, not the source. I mean, if it's something that feels bad to you or you get a sick feeling in your stomach or it just doesn't feel right, well, then that's not good. That's obviously not a being you want to get messages from. But another thing you said, Sally, I think is so important is that when we sleep or even in that lucid dreaming stage, we have so much a much easier time connecting with angels at that time. and we're just more open. We're dealing with our subconscious instead of our conscious. So all of our internal barriers that can get in the way are dropped, and we can receive information. And that's why on a spiritual journey, why we get so much information from all sorts of high level sources while we're sleeping in those in between stages. And if they think you're ready, and they do, they just said they do, that you're ready, like you want to see these things, you want to have more experiences, they're going to take advantage of those lucid states when you're a little awake, so you can kind of have a little consciousness going and a little bit of sleep where you're open to go in there and give you a powerful experience. So you might have to tell them, I'm not afraid. I want you to come back. I want to hear more of what you have to say.
Oh, I have so many discussions in that half awake, half asleep state.
I hear you. I think that's great.
Yeah.
When I hear them, oftentimes, like an instance, right in the throes of COVID, I was still working at the time in California, and I was thinking, gee, I wonder if I'm going to get COVID, because everyone around me was getting COVID. I had the vaccine, but that didn't really stop you from getting it. And I hear, this is what I mean by sort of cryptic, an angel speak, it will not come nigh your dwelling place. And I thought, I don't think in biblical terminology. And I heard a chuckle, and they said, that's why we said it that way. So my question is, they also exhibit a sense of humor, do they not?
Oh, yes. I mean, every angel has their own personality, but they can be very funny. And I hear them laughing at me regularly. Well, I'm, kind of goofy sometimes, so I can understand that. But, when you were speaking about COVID, that brings up something. And I guess this was pretty cryptic. So I'm in the grocery store, and this was maybe 9 or 10 months before COVID hit. I'm in the grocery store and I'm shopping, and I heard my angels say, get some of those. And I was walking through the can aisle, and I don't generally eat things from cans. And I'm like, okay. And I'm putting it in the cart. And then we go buy a few other things. They're like, get toilet paper. I'm like, I don't need more toilet paper. Like, get toilet paper. So okay. And they're like, get another one. I'm like, what the heck? Okay. Put it in my cart. And then later on subsequent shopping trips, it was a manual can opener. And there were multiple things I had. Like, I had to set up an extra pantry for these items that were dried goods. And I was at Walmart, and they had me get these big cans of like dehydrated foods, which I never buy things like that. But I'm like, okay. And I mentioned it a few months later to my business partner, Roz, who's passed since then. But I told her what's going on, and she was doing something. She went, what? She said, I'm having the same thing. Ed and I had to set up an extra pantry because we have so much more dried goods and cans and can opener. I'm like, and she's mentioned toilet paper. I'm like, okay. And we had been talking about how we felt like something was coming and it didn't feel good, but we didn't know what it was. And then wham, we knew what it was. And then it all made sense. And so that's a really good story to impart, to understand why it's important to do what your angels tell you to do, even if it doesn't make sense to you at the time. If you can do it, it's not illegal, immoral, and they wouldn't ask you to do illegal, immoral things, then do it.
Yeah. I've suffered the consequences of not doing it. So,
Hey,
yes.
I told my family and friends about it, and some of them laughed at me, and some of them went out and got things. And the ones who laughed at me, they had some problems, So I was giving things away. I was able to like share some of that with people during COVID. I didn't just like, hold it all into myself. Ha 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 ha, ha. I'm rich with toilet paper. No, I shared it with people who were stuck, who didn't know, who weren't able to get anything, all kinds of things. So our angels tell us things, and we just have to trust. They have this vision that is so much broader and wider and deeper than we have. They can see what's coming, what's going on behind the scenes. And because of that, things like that through my life, I've come to this place where they tell me to do something, I do it. That's it.
Yeah.
I just do it.
Well, and in the incidents where I didn't and ended up suffering the consequence was about a parking space. I was staying at a hotel on my way home between Texas and, at the time, Colorado. And I really, it felt, I had a question. It was another question. If this place was a safe place to park my car because it was the back of the hotel and it might get broke, there might be some problem with that. So, but at the time, I'm like, I'm right in front of this big glass door. What's going to happen? It's right down the hallway. I can see my car. And the next morning, we got up to leave, and the back of my car had been smashed in and stuff. Anything I had left in the car was stolen. And that had happened to me and another poor lady. And of course, I also had a fever because I had caught, and had my granddaughter with me. And it was a horrible day. And I would have given anything if I had paid attention to that prompting when I had it
Oh my
and
God.
didn't.
That's such a good point, because the times that I've ignored my angels because I didn't like it, maybe they told me break up with somebody early in the relationship and I didn't, or they told me don't take a certain job, even though it seemed great to me. Like, it led to bad things, and it led
Yeah.
to the 3 dark nights of the soul that I've gone through, which are horrible. I don't think I could survive another one. So I'm really striving to listen to everything they say, because I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to have my life turned into such a dark place that I can barely function. That's just not fun.
So tell me a little bit about how you communicate with angels in service of people who come to you. What does that look like?
So the primary service would be like a meet your angelic guides reading. That's the thing my angels told me to create first. And it is to help people start getting to know their angels and see them as the real beings they are, and begin talking to them throughout their days. And it just kind of opens up their gifts. And it's not something I'm doing, it's them reaching out to learn this information. So it's finding out, basically setting spiritual protection. So it's sacred space, and then calling through one of their angels or guides at a time and telling the person what the angel or guide's name is, what they look like, why they're with them, any messages they have for them. And especially knowing, I feel like if you know your 2 primary angels, that information about them, that you're okay. If you want to know the rest, that's fine. It's just icing on the cake. But knowing about your 2 primary angels, the ones who are dedicated 100% to you, they're only there for you. You can't possibly bother them because they're not working with anybody else. So they're just waiting around for you to ask them things like you did, like, is it safe to park here? I ask my angels things all through the day, constantly. Is this a good idea? Is this safe? Is that okay? And people can start doing that once they know something about their angels and start working with them. So it doesn't end there. That's the starting point. And then in that reading, I'm teaching them how to see angels, how to feel them, and how to hear them. And so then they can start practicing those skills. It's my book I wrote is an expanded version, vastly expanded version of that session. And so it just goes deeper. That I consider to be the primary thing I do, is introducing people to their angels and getting them started with communications between them.
Ivory, what's the title of your book?
Oh, it's Let Your Angels Lead. And Suzanne Wilson wrote the foreword for that book, so I
Oh,
appreciate her
fantastic.
doing that.
yeah.
It's been a beautiful journey. I mean, other things I do with angels would be a form of angelic healing that they gave to me. There's 2 things I do with angelic healing that involve frequency, and one is specifically working with Archangel Raphael, and one is in general working with angels. So I actually started my spiritual career 30 years ago now, doing Qigong energy healing, medical Qigong energy healing. And I was so passionate about that and I loved it, but I have arthritis in my back. So I can't hold twister positions for up to an hour anymore. I can't do the game of Twister like that anymore, which is what it looks like when you're doing that kind of treatment. So I really appreciate them giving me these forms of healing I can do that don't hurt me to do, because healing is so important. It's what's in my heart. And I consider everything I do to be a form of healing.
So talk a little bit more about frequency and how you utilize it or how it comes through from the angelic realm. Uh, Tell us a little bit how you work with
Well,
frequency.
frequency is just a vibration each individual thing has. Humans each have their own frequency. Angels have a frequency. For those who are listening, I'm going to try to describe this. Those who are watching, it's easier. So humans are here. We vibrate here. Angels would be vibrating here. Archangels are vibrating up here. So each one's a little bit higher. So we need to raise our frequency as high as we can to get closer to those higher frequency beings so that we can hear what they're saying and feel them easier and see them easier. And the technique involved with that is not simple because it means raising your frequency and then keeping it that high. I write about it a lot. I talk about it a lot on my podcast, The Angel Room. I have done so many blog posts about it because everything depends on your frequency. If you are watching, listening to, talking about, or thinking about low frequency emotions and topics like war, hatred, fear, hopelessness, anxiety, you're feeling anxious, depressed, all of these things like are very low frequency, and it's going to pull your personal frequency down, and it'll make it much harder to communicate with your angels or hear them. And they're going to be working double time to try to help you, but it's extensive. How to raise it is extensive. There's thousands of different ways. I always write about, like, here's the top 10 to start with, pick a few of these, and things like dancing and singing is a very fast way to raise your frequency. Being outside in nature helps a lot. Things like watching what you eat, not eating a lot of things that are highly processed foods or chemicals, not having alcohol or as little as possible, not having a lot of sugar, all the things people are like, oh, Ivory, you're killing us here. But those things are low frequency, and organic foods, vegetables, especially organic vegetables, purified water, very high frequency. I can't change the science of that. It's not my opinion. It's like, that's the facts of frequencies. So it's watching what you think, watching what you say, watching what you eat. It's constant vigilance if you really want to get your frequency high and keep it there.
And I just want to add one thing to that: laugh a lot.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to think. There's one more thing, laughing. And angels will talk about that a lot too. Like in readings, they'll tell people, well, their joy guide might come through who's an angel and just say, here's what you need to do. But often it is, you need more laughter. So I find myself watching a lot of old comedies. If I'm going to like have the TV on, I like to hear the old ones. And that, it's a good way. Like I feel my frequency rising as I'm laughing. Anything that gets you laughing, as long as it doesn't have violence and low frequency things involved in the humor, which is why I guess I go to the older shows. But yes, absolutely. There's people who will sit in groups. Like when I have my circle meet, the first thing we do is we sing and we laugh. We laugh together to get our frequency really high.
Mm-hmm.
And it works fantastic.
And I work with several different Zoom groups, and and Sally will tell you this is true. I often will say something to evoke laughter because I feel like it brings the whole Zoom group up if they laugh. So I'm often searching for something funny to say and change the frequency that way. We humans tend to take ourselves way too seriously.
Yes, we do. For little pieces of flotsam on a ball rolling through space, we're like smaller than ants in the overall scheme. It's pretty funny. And it helps to keep that in mind, because no matter, I don't care how famous a person is or how rich a person is, there's still this little speck of dust on a little tiny ball rolling through space. So, to take yourself too seriously is to miss the point of being here.
I agree.
And I find too that if you spend a lot of time working to keep your frequency up, to kind of reach those higher levels, that your tolerance for the lower frequency food or content or whatever it is just sort of disappears. I mean, you get to where you can't stand to watch a violent movie anymore, or you can't stand to have that glass of wine, in the evening. And so, yeah, I've given a lot of things up because
Oh,
I
yeah.
just can't tolerate them anymore.
And that's very common because your frequency rises. So low frequency activities, people, foods, movies, books won't work. Years ago, I loved Stephen King books and horror movies. I cannot tolerate anything like that anymore. Like it
Yeah.
makes me, I'm an empath too, and it just makes me feel sick to my stomach, and I get that pain in my solar plexus, and I'm like, okay, that's your body's way of telling you there's big holes being poked in your energetic field, and that's going to affect your frequency. But the biggest thing for me when you talk about that, Sally, is my intolerance to be around low frequency people. And so I had, like, if I'd been to a social group for a long time and it seemed fine when I was there, and then I don't go for a long time and then I go again and it just doesn't feel good. And because I've changed, they haven't changed. They're the same people, same group, but I've changed. And it's not about somebody being better than or higher than somebody else. It's just energy. It's science. This is all science. And if you feel that something doesn't feel comfortable to you, whether it's a person, an activity, a food, a movie, a book, then that's your own higher self telling you it's not good for you. This isn't good for you anymore. And you're right, you may not even want some of those things anymore. I always tell people don't worry too much about the diet thing because it's like your higher self and your angels will guide you through that. First, you might decide to stop drinking or stop smoking or stop something else. And then down the road a little way, suddenly you feel like, you know what, I want to have more vegetables in my diet. And then down the road, you're like, I'm going to give up sugar. It's not a good idea to try to go cold turkey and do all of that at once, but let your higher self and your angels guide you as to what is best beneficial for you at this time and just let the journey unfold.
That's great advice. I love that.
I do too.
Really good.
Too. You mentioned angels are here. Would they have a message that they would like to give to our audience?
This is sort of a repeat of something they said to my friends and I the other night, but not the same words. But they're saying, stop worrying about all the things that might happen because things are going to be okay. And I need to hear that regularly. I actually ask them regularly, because I've been an environmental minded person since '84 when my angels showed me some things that are unfolding now, made me very passionate about it. And I'll ask them, like, are we actually going to destroy our planet and make it a hell place to live here? And they're like, no, no, it's going to be fine. We're going to turn this around. And I feel like that's part of what they're talking about. But when they're saying this message to you all today, it's a much broader meaning because I can feel that. They're not talking about one particular area or topic, but just in general, things feel pretty chaotic. And they said, this is not the worst time in history. I say that. It's not the worst time in history. It's just probably the worst time we can remember who are living now. But they're just saying things are going to turn around and trust. And that's what I have to do. I don't see how it's going to happen, but I trust them that it will.
Well, now I keep hearing from a lot of quarters that we're on the verge of a big shift in consciousness on this planet. Do you get that from the angels? But I also feel it's not like something that's going to happen instantaneously. It's a process that we're undergoing. And, the old phrase, it's always darkest before the dawn. I think we're in a very tumultuous time on the planet right now. I mean, there was an earthquake in New York.
There was one somewhere closer to where I live because last night I was not quite asleep. I was still awake and my bed started shaking. I'm like, oh, that's weird, like a mild earthquake. And then another one. And then when I read there was an earthquake, I thought, oh, it probably was last night around 1:30 a.m. Nope. So I don't know where that one was.
It was the angels.
Maybe. They don't usually shake my bed. Spirit has, but angels don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot going on. There's chaos on all quarters and everywhere you go, and people who are like, oh, I'm just going to move to another country. What makes you think things are going so great there? This chaos is all over the planet right now, and it's a lot to do with exactly what you said, Gary. Like it's the leading towards a very positive change, but there has to be a lot of change to accomplish that. To have that much change on major areas of life is going to be is kind of like a lot of upheaval, and it makes people feel unsettled and it makes them feel worried. But I have had plenty of visions psychically and from the angels of what's coming after all of this, and the further ahead it goes, the better it is. It's just people living very peacefully. And I will say technology, I've never seen any technology in those visions, so I don't know what happens to technology, but I have a feeling we're going to be living much more simple lives. It seems like sort of a village existence, but everyone seems so happy and so contented, and I hang on to that. That's one of the things they showed me back in '84, and I really hold tight to that. I need to remember that that's what's coming. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I feel like we have about 4 more years, 3 to 4 more years of turmoil before things really start unfolding based on what the angels tell me, because I talk to them every night about this and other things. 3 to 4 more years, and then things start to settle down, and they just said more equity. That's interesting. Do you mean, what do you mean? That's in relation to the poor, people who are really struggling financially, they said. So there's more equity for them. And that's a beautiful thing to know.
Yeah.
So I know that we're going to be okay. It feels really scary right now. Change is always scary, but let's be honest, change is the one thing we can count on happening all the time. Sometimes it's very slight, so we don't notice it, and sometimes it's big. Right now, there's a lot of big change, so it makes us feel unsettled. So spend more time grounding, do meditation, do yoga, do deep breathing. All of those things will really help. I'm also a big proponent of grounding mats, which is you plug it in and it has the same frequency as the earth, so you can put your feet on it or sleep on it. It's really powerful.
I love grounding. I haven't actually owned a grounding mat, but I have looked into them. And I think they are a fantastic way for people who can't go get their feet in the earth or in the ocean or in, in places where they can sort of naturally ground themselves. And I've also heard wonderful, at least anecdotal stories about how people have felt physically so much better from using
I
devices
think
like
so.
that.
I mean, where I live, the problem is that I don't have any grass or soil on my property. It's gravel. Like the Arizona loves gravel yards. So also a lot of times of the year, it's either maybe 108 degrees outside, and I'm obviously a very pale person. So I'm not out sitting in the sun with my feet in grass somewhere, or it's cold and snowing. So, if the weather isn't working for you, if it's you don't have grass or real grass or soil at your disposal where you can do earthing, which is where you put your feet on it for 30 minutes a day. You can read a book, you can talk to people while you're doing it, but it's just absorbing the energy of the earth. A grounding mat does the same thing, so you can use it anytime.
So speaking of location and where you are, you talked about being led to the Sedona area. Do you have a good understanding and knowing of why Sedona in particular?
Well, I'll be honest with you, for 40 years, I lived just over the mountain range in Prescott. That's where I finished high school, and I had 2 careers there. And, that's where my life was. I never planned to leave there. I'm distracted because one of my ears is ringing really, really high, which is always angels trying to get my attention. So they did. They got my attention all right. But I want to try to focus on you right now.
Well, I was going to say, please let them say whatever they feel the need to
They're
say
not
as well.
saying anything. They're just like ringing
Okay.
that ear
They're
really
just there.
high pitch. So one thing is I noticed, and it's important that I just lived over the mountain. I have a daughter. When she was little, we would go on girl retreats to Sedona, and we would come over in the fall and we'd stay in a little cabin. Most of those aren't even down in the canyon anymore. And we would do hiking, and we would play Red Sonja in the woods. That's a whole different story. And we would go to restaurants and look in the shops, and it was really fun. But what I noticed was both of us would feel so happy, almost giddy, when we were in certain areas of Sedona, particularly West Sedona. And so as she got older, noticed it too. She ended up getting married in Sedona. And I decided I would find a place for my business. It's not there anymore because when my partner passed away last year, it just wasn't possible to continue that. So I work from home, but I placed it in West Sedona for that reason because the frequency is just so good there and feels really good. I continue to feel like Sedona is a very high frequency place in certain places, particularly like along Oak Creek at Red Rock Crossing. That was a place that we used to close the office down if we didn't have sessions for a couple hours. We would carpool over there. We would go down to the creek and we would do a circle and just like raise our frequency, and we would feel like we're flying after being there. So I'm just telling you, if you come to Sedona, go to Red Rock Crossing.
And apparently a lot of vortices there.
Oh yeah. And oh yeah. So in West Sedona, I could feel the effect of all of them there, and so did Roz, my business partner, who was really, her work centered around energy. And so we could feel the effect of all of them in that particular location, which is why we liked it so much. And people would come in and say, oh, it feels so good here. It's because all the energy, you don't have to be like right at the center of a vortex in order to achieve the effects of it.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely an energy there. I have visited one time and very specifically gave myself time to go hike to some of the, the vortices, and it was a palpable, fuzzy, buzzy, kind of a spinning feel to those locations. So there's no doubt that there's quite a lot, at least energetically, going on in that part of the country.
It's been interesting. Like my office is no longer in Sedona, so I'm between Sedona and Jerome, which is fine because it's two of my very favorite places in Arizona. So I'm happy with that.
I'm also very fond of Sedona. Been there several times and really love it. It's a powerful place.
It is, and it's just so beautiful. I think we should have never had a town there. I think we should have never built anything there. think it should have just stayed like a national park, perhaps. But it is, and that's the fact, and there it is. So it's still a beautiful place to go with lots of lovely hiking. But we've even had angelic experiences. One of our clients who came from Canada told us that she had hiked out on, I was going to say Dry Gulch, but that's Prescott, Dry Creek, way out Dry Creek, and then turn right before Encanto Resort. And there's a hiking trail down there that goes by the Red Rocks. And she saw what she thought might be an angel, and she showed me a picture, and it was. So we took a half day off, and off we went, and the three of us went down to that same place, and there were a lot of angels down there. And interestingly, they were royal blue.
Wow.
Very interestingly, but there was a particular spot, nothing special looking about the spot, but there were a lot of angels there. So you never know what you're going to encounter hiking in the Sedona area.
Well, and Mother Earth is her own, entity. She is her own self, and I'm sure she has angels as well as the rest of us.
Yeah, Native Americans lived there for so many, many thousands of years before we came along, and that was sacred land. So that's part of why it feels so good. That's why it feels good. That's why they made it sacred land, because they could feel that too. But I wanted to get back to something if we have time. So we kind of started off talking about how angels can save you. And this story keeps going through my head. It's in my book. That's okay. I'm going to tell you anyway. When I was 16, our parents went out of the country on a vacation. And I'm the oldest of five. I was left in charge. So I'm 10 years older than the youngest daughter. Well, I wasn't supposed to drive anywhere, but there was a party. And I felt responsible for my siblings. So I'm like, well, I'll just take them with me. So I had my boyfriend and his brother and one of my sisters in the truck cab of my dad's truck as I'm driving. The rest of these kids are in the back in the open bed. Yeah, I thought I better take them. I'm in charge of them. So I'm driving through this place called Government Canyon in Prescott. And back then there were not very many houses there. And there was some very steep drop-offs with no guardrails of any kind. And I'm following this car and it kept going faster and faster. And I was nervous because we were kind of sliding on these dirt roads on the curves, and they started going a little faster. So I sped up, and the right hand wheels of the truck, both front and back, slid off the road. And there was a very steep drop off there. And my thought was, oh my God, I just killed all of us. That's it. We're all dead. And at that second, the whole cab like lit up with this golden light, and the truck lifted up, and we rocketed to the left and up this drive that I didn't even see there. And it went up really fast, and we came to a stop against a rock, and it cracked the bug shield on my dad's truck. And I'm just sitting there. I could still feel their energy around me. And I'm like, well, so Dad, I confessed that later in my 30s, and they told me they already knew because, the cracked bug guard, they wondered if I would ever confess that. But my sisters and I were talking a few years ago, and our baby sister, who's 10 years younger, who was only 6 at the time, she had asked my sister, who's close to my age, is that true, that story in her book about us in the car? And my sister's like, oh, yeah. And Mary, my youngest sister, Mary, who might watch this, I don't know, she was horrified. She's like, oh, giving me this look. I'm like, hey, I keep telling you guys I'm not perfect. I keep telling you I have done things that are not great. You just don't want to listen. But, I was 16. My judgment was faulty at best. And that's why I don't speed. I don't think we would be alive. None of us.
Luckily, our angels love us despite our stupidity.
Yes, they
Thank
do.
goodness. Thank
They
goodness.
don't expect us to be perfect.
No.
They don't. I think I have higher expectations for me than my angels do. I'm pretty.
Exactly.
But another time I was living in Colorado, and I lived in Fruita. And so the Colorado National Monument, which is like a mini Grand Canyon, was nearby. And I was married to somebody who was very abusive. And I was just so upset, and I just had to get out of the house. And I remember I don't remember why I was dressed up so much, but I was wearing like a really nice skirt and a top and stockings and heels. And it was drizzling out. And I didn't know where to go. I drove over, it's not very far, over to the monument. And I started walking on my favorite hiking trail. It's right along the edge of the canyon, and it's raining. That's not a good combo. So I'm walking along, and all of a sudden, that's a lie. I was stomping because I was really upset. And the dirt just crumbled from under my feet, and I'm hanging off the side of that cliff. There's a root. I'm hanging on a root, dangling over this cliff. And I thought, oh, this is it. This is how I die. And the next thing I know, boom, I'm standing back up on the pathway again, looking down at the place where the dirt crumbled away, and I'm covered in mud. I'm actually covered in mud, and my stockings are shredded, but I'm alive to tell the story. So those are 2 times that really stay in my mind very heavily, because if it's not your time, your angels are not going to let you go. They're not going to let something happen. I've had so many dark people come after me and try to hurt me and do things, and they just will not let it happen. They will not let that happen. So, know that you are protected. And, one thing I think I should talk about too is how to know if your angels are protecting you at that moment. Like in times when my life was in danger and I was terrified, I would see one of 2 things. Either the entire room would light up silently, so brighter than this room now in daylight, or it would be a very wide arc of white light that would just slowly and silently go across the room. And I'd feel the angel. I feel them now as I'm telling you. I'd feel the angel's energy. And no matter how scared I was, I'd go right to sleep. And my daughter said, how can you just go to sleep? I'm like, if the angels are there and they're on it, what can I do that the angels can't do? And I was exhausted. I'd been up too scared to sleep. So when you see things like that, that's what that is. And I actually didn't know that for a while. Like in my young years, I'd see that flash of bright white light. I thought that was back in the time when flash bulbs still existed. So I just thought somebody was like taking pictures at night. And I'm like, that is so weird. Why are they doing that? No, the flash bulb, I don't know, you might remember this, but it had a very loud sound to it when the flash bulb, these would be very silent. They're very, very bright, bigger than the flash bulb, and silent. So if you see that, it's your angels actively protecting you at that moment.
Wow. Well, may we all have an experience of our angels. That's what I wish for humanity. And it's just been delightful having you here today, Ivory. Do you have some parting words for our listeners and viewers?
I hope that if you're not already on the journey of getting a relationship built with your angels and trying to communicate with them, that maybe this will inspire you to do so. I don't care if you do it through my book or somebody else's book. It's not about that. It's about that the angels are incredibly eager for as many people as possible to have a close relationship with their angels right now, to get as much guidance as possible, because this is such a difficult time.
Thank you. It's been great having you today.
Such a great topic of conversation. And we're grateful for all that you do to serve all the people around you that come to you.
Thank you. You two are doing service as well. You feel driven to do this show, and it's helping humanity.
And it is just a great joy and a pleasure. So thanks
Thank
again
you.
for
I enjoyed
joining
it
us.
too.
If you enjoyed this content, please hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.